Hey, I'm Taylor Howsmon. I'm the assistant pastor of children, youth, and young adults at Meadowview Presbyterian Church in Lexington, North Carolina. And you're listening to RYM's Local Youth Worker Podcast.
One, two, three.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode. I'm here today with Taylor Howsmon. Taylor, how's it going?
Good, John. How you doing?
Doing well. It's good to see you. Good to have you on the podcast. I know this is your first time on the podcast. We go, I guess, pretty far back, maybe 3, 4, 5 years, something along those lines now. Maybe longer.
Something like that. I was thinking earlier this week. It's kind of an honor to be on the podcast. I've been a fan of it for so long. I feel kind of humbled by the opportunity to be on the podcast. But yeah, you and I go back a good ways, and my relationship with RYM goes back, I guess, 11 years now. So which is pretty wild. I started as an intern with RYM back then, and so yeah, it's been great having the opportunity to utilize and benefit from a lot of the resources, and yeah, I'm grateful to be here.
Yeah, man, it's good to have you on. And as you're saying all that, I totally forgot about the RYM internship and your connection there, as you said that. And so, yeah, since this is your first time on, why don't you just let our listeners know where you're currently joining us from, but then a little bit about your family and other ministry experience you've got.
Sure. Yeah, I'm currently serving as the assistant pastor of children, youth, and young adults at Meadowview Presbyterian Church in Lexington, North Carolina. So yeah, I oversee basically everybody from cradle to 30 is sort of my broad umbrella, and spend most of my time with the youth. I think that's the bulk of my focus. I've also just taken on responsibilities overseeing worship and music. So that's a new thing in the last couple of weeks. So yeah, so that's kind of a broad look at what I'm doing here. I'm
That's
married.
a lot.
Yeah, we got a lot going on for sure. Yeah, it's been a lot taken on the plate, but it's a great opportunity. I'm thrilled. Something that I've been passionate about for a long time has been kind of worship and sort of what that looks like. And I think we're excited to have a pastor over that, and so I'm fired up for that. But yeah, it's gonna be a busier week for sure. So
Yeah.
yeah. So I guess more about me. I'm married to Cynthia. We'll be married 6 years in September. We have 2 daughters. Naomi is 3 and Caroline is 6 months. And yeah, we've lived here for 4 years. So we moved here 4 years ago, and yeah, my wife teaches first grade at an elementary school in town, and yeah, so I'm from Virginia originally, right outside of Richmond. I grew up there. I went to Virginia Commonwealth University for my undergrad, and I was a sports writer for a couple years out of college. And then yeah, I became a church intern with RYM in 2011, and moved to Rochester, Minnesota, to work at Trinity Presbyterian Church there. And that was a unforgettable experience for a lot of reasons. It was great. And yeah, and then went to Grace Covenant Presbyterian in Williamsburg, Virginia, and was there 4 years. And then yeah, we moved to Charlotte for seminary, and then to Lexington for full-time ministry while I finished seminary. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I remember the Rochester connection as well. So no, it's good to be reminded of all that. And you and I, we saw each other this summer at our Maryland conference, and we had hoped to sit down and to record a podcast, and the week got away from us and we didn't get to. We're going to talk about your elective in just a little bit. Before we do that though, I'd love for you to talk about your trip to the conference because yeah, something unique happened that pretty much every youth worker can identify with. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we had an interesting experience, adventure kind of on the way to RYM. This was my 9th RYM summer conference, and up until this year, I've always taken church vans, and never have had an issue. This year we took a charter bus and thought that it was going to be a much easier experience, and it turns out that we broke down about 20 miles into Virginia. Yeah, he kind of stood up and told us that something had gone wrong on the bus, and Yeah, so we pulled off into an Exxon station in Warfield, Virginia. I never heard of it. I grew. My parents' house is like 35 minutes from there, so
Hmm.
I grew up near there, but I had never heard of it. And yeah, so we were at this Exxon station with our 30 high schoolers and four adult leaders for about 4.5 hours
Hmm.
as
Oh
they
my
drove a
goodness.
new bus up from North Carolina to get us. So yeah, it was terrible in the moment. I think, if I'm honest, I was not happy about it. But I think as we kind of look back and reflect on it, it was one of those moments. I think that I've joked for years. I think the Lord's brought about probably some of my favorite moments in youth ministry out of the worst possible situations. When everything goes wrong, those are some of my favorite stories, and so this certainly falls into that category. But yeah, our youth did a great job handling that situation, much better than I did, I think, if I'm honest. And yeah, we I think our group as a whole grew much stronger out of it. So it was a really cool thing the Lord used for that. So
Yeah, yeah, no, that's something. Like I said, pretty much every youth worker listening to this is probably smiling, nodding. Everyone seems to have some kind of transportation issue at some point in ministry. I've definitely had that scenario. Actually, traveling back from an RYM home. Yeah, we broke down on the side of the road. It's, I don't know, late June in Mississippi, so we're all just baking in the sun on the side of the road and insanity. But yeah, I just thought it'd be interesting to reference that because so many can resonate with that. And like you just said, it's awful, it's miserable, and I think that's how you started your week with students. It's like you're already 4 hours late. You're showing up to a conference. You're going to be bunking with these students. To do that on the front of the conference, I think would be even worse than on the end, like I went through. Anything that comes to mind of how the Lord has used that to foster unity with you guys, or have your students even remarked on it? Are there jokes now? Anything from that whole experience?
yeah, I think it is very it's very funny. I've talked about, I think, by God's grace it happened on the way there and not on the way back. I've
Hmm.
always thought, I kind of think the opposite. I think I'm always so ready to get back when we get back, and I'm
Hmm.
always okay with things taking a little longer on the way up, just because that's when we finally, you start to see some of the walls break down, and so I think that yeah, it's has brought about a lot of jokes in our group. I think we've the place we stopped at, or we're breaking down at, where it was called Jenkins Mini Mart. I think they have asked to make Jenkins Mini Mart T-shirts and do all that, which would be great. And yeah, so I think that kind of experience, I think it was great because we were able to bond. There were some kids in our group that it was their first trip like this, first trip ever with this group. Some that had started with our group fairly recently, and so it was just one of those situations where if you're going to be kind of try to stay on the fringe, we're going to kind of force you into
Hmm.
community here on this small patch of grass in rural Virginia, under the one tree that we could get shade from. And yeah, so it was one of those. I think it was great to see some of that relationship bonding. We had a woman that stopped by. We were there for about 2.5 hours, and a woman pulled up with Little Caesars pizza, for our group, and she said she saw us
Wow.
standing out there. Um, she told us her story. She lost her son earlier in the summer. Her
Hmm.
son was 17, died in a car accident in the first part of June. And she said something that he was very kind of passionate about was giving food to people that he thought looked like they needed it, and that was
Hmm.
something that he always did. And so she saw us standing out there, and thought it was a great opportunity to sort of honor her son in that. Um, and yeah, just what a blessing for our group. What an opportunity for our group um, to see something like that and to experience something like that. And it came at a great time. We were hungry, so
Hmm.
the Lord provided, but it was more than pizza, which I think was a something that none of us will ever forget. I've heard several of our kids kind of recap that We had one of our seniors that got up in front of the church Sunday morning after we got back and was talking about kind of the impact RYM had had on him, and that story was kind of what he started with. And I think
Hmm.
most people in our church weren't aware that that happened, and so it was a pretty cool thing. So
Man, that's incredible. I mean, you just think in God's providence of the frustration of a bus breaking down, and exactly where you end up is where this woman is going to pass by and get to share that story. And so, I mean, all of a sudden you see this car pull up and she gets out and she has a stack of pizzas. And does she just come over to you and share her story? I mean, how did that interchange
yeah,
happen?
so one of our I was over on the kind of the opposite side playing. I think I was playing Phase 10 with several of our high schoolers. But one of our female leaders was standing right there when she pulled up, and so she kind of got into conversation with this woman, and yeah, by the time I got over there, they're kind of teary eyed, hugging each
Hmm.
other, and so it was just a really amazing thing, and I think that even in that moment, to that adult leader to be the one that sort of,
Hmm.
she's easily our most kind of personally engaging, energetic kind of leader, and I think that um I was past the point of anger at the situation by that point, but I was certainly exhausted by the sun, and not
Hmm.
probably not myself. So I mean, I was even thankful that that she was the one that kind of greeted this woman, and yeah, just an unbelievable thing.
Hmm.
Uh, that whole, I think it's one of those things, and I even used it in my elective. We can get to that later, but I think it's just one of those ministry things you're never going to forget. And I think it's I'm not saying this doesn't happen in other phases of ministry, but it's one of those things I think about youth ministry that's just unique, and you just see
Hmm.
stuff like that happen. Um, and for some reason, when it's teenagers, it lands, I think, more profoundly, and it's just an incredible experience. So thankful for
Yeah.
it after the fact, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, no, I bet. Now that's an incredible story, and yeah, it's awesome just to think of that lasting impact that it will have on those students, and letting our listeners know too. It's like, okay, that was the beginning of your trip. You showed up to this conference. I mean, this conference that first day had some insanity. I mean, we had, I think, a mile down the road from camp, a tree fell on a power line and that caught on fire, and the fire department had to come, and so we lost power to the entire facility. And then that evening, and you guys might have been there by then, a storm came through, power went out again right as we're starting large group. So there was just all sorts of crazy things going on.
Yeah, it
Um,
was wild for sure.
yeah, yeah.
When we got there, our bus pulled up and the sky just opened up. It'd been threatening rain for a while, so it's just this torrential downpour. We got students running from the bus to the dining hall. We decided to wait till the rain stopped before we got our bags, but because of the rain and the storm, they didn't want us walking to the worship area. So we're kind of quarantined into this little corner of the dining hall away from the windows. Um, and without our stuff, we're just kind of just kind of huddled there. And yeah, it was a perfect end to that kind of day. But
Mm,
I told our students, I gathered them around as we're sort of quarantined there, and I told them, I was like, don't, it will reflect a lot more upon all this, but don't waste this day.
mm,
Don't let this day just sort of pass as a good story. It's more than this. We've seen, the Lord's protection. We've seen the Lord's provision. We've seen the way God has um, every step of the way. It's just none of this has been an accident, and
mhm.
don't waste the day.
Yeah.
And I think that was that's been brought up 2 or 3 times since then in small groups and things like that. Just um, the idea, don't waste the day, don't forget, and don't let one day pass without noticing kind of what the Lord is doing, and taking
Hmm.
for granted. And so I think that even was an opportunity as a pastor to both share kind of um my failings in that moment, but also share something that I think is something that I needed to hear, and something that that resonated with them as well. So it was a pretty amazing.
Yeah. For sure. And that's, yeah, some great wisdom and leadership to point that out to your students. And I'm looking forward to getting into your elective and just how this will tie into that. But let's take a quick break and then we'll be back with more. All right, we're back here with Taylor Howsmon. Taylor was an elective speaker for us this summer at our high school Mid-Atlantic Conference, which is in Northeast Maryland. Anyone close to the area or not, we'd encourage you to check out that conference. It's an awesome conference that's on the Chesapeake Bay. A lot of great activities, a lot of fun. We've talked about this on the podcast before. People often ask, what's our favorite RYM summer conference? And we don't really, as a staff, really give an answer. It's kind of like we just go through all of them and talk about uniquenesses to each of them. And High School Mid-Atlantic, it's a unique conference and a lot of fun. So I want to encourage people to check it out. Taylor, why don't you tell everybody the title of your elective, and then we'll just kind of go into the different days and all that good stuff.
Okay. Yeah. So the topic I was given at the beginning of the year was doubt, and so that was sort of the one. I love when super broad topics are given. It's always nice to have limitless possibilities of things to talk about. But so doubt was the topic, and my class was titled "This Will All Make Sense When I'm Older." ... Just kidding. No, it won't. That is a shameless reference to Frozen 2, which my 3-year-old Naomi has made me watch more times than I'd like to admit. And and I think that the first day I sort of explained the reason why I titled it that was, I remember how I thought when I was a teenager, and I see how a lot of our youth are thinking. And I kind of want to try to shake them out of the Olaf style of thinking. That was kind of the way that I put it, was to say, yeah, it's not going to all make sense. It's never going to make sense. And in fact, it's going to get more confusing. that's just the reality of what it is to live in a broken world. But there are some things that we can take away to give us hope and joy and comfort. And so I taught through the book of Habakkuk. Basically, this is my third elective I've taught. And in each one, I've liked to take a shorter book of the Bible, preferably so I could teach the whole book. I did Jonah 2 years ago. And so I did Habakkuk. It's a book that's had such an impact on my life, as from pretty much the word go. And every time I read it, I think I get a little bit something different out of it. And it gave me an opportunity to, I think, share something that I really struggle with, but also share a large part of my story, which I think is always a good approach in an elective. I think that's a good theme, as I've listened to other people talk about their electives, is being to incorporate and to be able to tell some of the things in your story is really, really helpful and important. So I think that was sort of the idea of it anyway. So.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, several things. One, just I love the Frozen 2 reference. That's definitely been a movie we've watched plenty of times in the Parrott household. Olaf, absolutely hilarious in that one. I thought he might have been even funnier in that. But I love how you're kind of getting students to see, let's not just go through life thinking like Olaf and being like Olaf. I love how you did that. And then just the trying to unpack a book in an elective. And I'd love for you, if willing, just kind of share a little bit about your story, how you said that kind of tied into some of this elective.
Yeah. So I think it was very funny leading up to the elective, because I had a story that I was going to tell the first day. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, John, but sometimes you have a story that you're going to tell, and then you kind of have a story in the back of your head that you should tell.
Yes.
And I think that talking to my wife and I, we talked about it on and off, but we didn't really seriously talk about it until I think the night before I left, maybe 2 nights before I left, but just sort of, is it okay to tell this story? And what I wanted, and especially the first day, as we're reading the opening of Habakkuk, what we see in that book is that he is both kind of put off by God's absence, and then he's put off by God's answer. So I sort of approach the question, why do we doubt? And obviously that can be answered so many ways, but kind of in a broad way, my two answers were because God seems absent, and because sometimes God answers, and that's harder than God's absence.
Mm.
And what I wanted to impress upon them in that first day was just to say, you know, there is a category for, Christians who doubt, and that is not a disqualifier of faith. And in fact, it's a sign that you're engaging your faith. And that's sort of the underlying theme I wanted to get across, was to say, all of you doubt. Some of you have been taught to try to hide that, or in some cases to try to glorify that. And I think either way, you're falling off to a bad side. But I told the story the first day of probably the hardest thing that I've gone through in my life, and certainly the hardest thing my wife and I have gone through together. And it happened 2 years ago. Two RYMs ago. I had taught my first elective ever at RYM. I taught on Jonah. Felt like it went well. It's the first time our church here in Lexington had ever gone on a trip like RYM. It's obviously been close to my heart for years, but it's the first time any of them had experienced something like this. And they came back talking like it was just the most earth-shattering, most important thing they had ever been a part of. And so you had that feeling like, okay, this is why I got into ministry. Like I've finally arrived in some sense. Like this is the feeling you're supposed to have. Like, the Lord is blessing ministry, and the Lord has given you this great experience. My wife was pregnant at the time, and so it's not just a ministry kind of feeling, but it's a personal life. We're going to have our second child, and you just sort of get that feeling where, okay, things are settling and things are feeling good. And the morning after we got back, so less than 24 hours, we found out my wife had miscarried, and we lost the baby. And I just remember thinking how amazing it was, how quick we went from, this is why I'm in ministry, this is great, to almost wondering if God even existed. If I'm honest, and certainly why I'm doing any of this, but if God was even there. And I remember we had youth group the night after we got back, I guess that Wednesday. And I remember sitting in the corner of our youth room, just sort of looking and sitting there like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. I don't like ministry. I don't like the church. I don't like any of it. And so I just wanted to give them that and tell them sort of the more details of that story, to kind of convey that if you're somebody that thinks that because you doubt, you're somehow less of a Christian, or you're somehow not as good, or you're somehow, just understand that everybody who's ever been a Christian has had those moments where they wonder if God's there. And not only if God's there, but sometimes God tells them what gives them an answer, and they hate that worse than God's not being there. Here we have Habakkuk as an example of that, from Scripture. And so in God's holy and God's holy word that He's given us, we have this example of a prophet who is exasperated with God. He's angry with God. He doesn't like God's answers. He hates God's absence. He wonders why God's going to sit there and watch justice be perverted and all of these things. And God's given us that by His grace and His word. And so a little bit of an encouragement just to say that we doubt because God seems absent. We doubt because God's answers. And yet what we see from Habakkuk is that God's never really absent, and God always has reason behind His answers. And both of those things are true. And but to get a chance to share that, I think I'm not a person who naturally likes to share really deep personal stories. I think most of my stories are sort of surface level, kind of more comedic, kind of, that's the sort of where I'm comfortable. So to share something like that, a story that many of our students didn't even know. I was telling our youth that story for the first time in a lot of cases. who were there at youth group that night and knew something was wrong, and who, I mean, it like connected dots now that made sense. And it's, um, yeah, it was just it was an unusual opportunity for me to feel something uncomfortable.
Mm.
But I think that it really helped kind of get across the point. And yeah, I think the Lord really used that. I set up every year when I teach an elective, I set up a Google Voice number so that students can text questions, can text comments. They can do it anonymously, so they can be honest. And I mean, I don't know who the numbers are, so it's but yeah, I got about probably 8 to 10 text messages that afternoon during free time. Um, a couple students saying, yeah, we lost, my family, my mom lost a baby last year, and I'm still
Mm.
not sure what to do with that. Thank you for opening that up. Or, they had brought in other really, really traumatic and hard situations that made them doubt God, made them doubt God's care, God's presence, God's existence entirely. And being able to just hear that and to open up about that a little bit, I think was a helpful thing for a lot of students that have been suffering kind of quietly. So
Hmm. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I mean, that is something sadly that is so common to so many going through that, and I appreciate your vulnerability to do that. As you're saying, you do not typically share something like this. So, what was it? The night before. I mean, prompting of the Holy Spirit, we could say. But as you're talking with your wife, you're kind of thinking through this. Kind of just walk us through that, where you thought, okay, this is a story I do want to share.
yeah, I mean, I think that you kind of have those. I don't, it's hard to say. I think you kind of have those stories that you sort of have in the back of your head that when you're in the position of prepping a sermon or a class or a talk, and you either feel like, man, it would be perfect for this, or man, you kind of think, I wish I could tell that. Because
Mm-hmm.
that'd be the best way for me to convey sort of what I'm trying to get across here. And so I think that it was always in the back of my mind in terms of a good story to attach to this, a good
Mm-hmm.
illustration. But that sort of feeling of, I don't know if I can do it. First of all, I don't know if I can get through it and tell that story.
Mm-hmm.
And so my emotional reaction to that might be a distraction, and I don't want that to happen. But also, just I don't know how to ask my wife if I can use that story. And it's one thing to do it when we know the students that are going to hear it are going to be from other youth groups, and they're good. But we had 30 kids, and a lot of them sat in my class, and so these are girls in our youth group that have babysat for us, and girls that my
Mm-hmm.
wife is close to, and kids that know my family very well. And so, yeah, I mean, it is stepping out into a very kind of uncomfortable space. And so I think for months I had it kind of jotted down on a notepad in terms of something that I might want to try to do, but I had no idea how to approach it, and no
Sure.
idea how it would go. I was praying that morning, and even then, as I sort of felt the weight of that, it's sort of, I mean, I had one of those kind of moments where I'm like, am I really going to do? Is this really going to happen? Like, I don't. So, yeah, it was I mean, I think that was sort of what prompted it, I guess, was I'm thankful that my wife is, sort of is gracious and is understanding that I typically don't enter into hard conversations well. She can usually read when I'm trying to sort of poke around at something that, so I'm thankful for that. But also just, I think it was, yeah, it was the best way to sort of, I think, open up what it was. And I don't know what it is. We were talking about this, I think, at RYM, because somebody else brought it up on a previous podcast. But there's something about the environment of an elective, that's just unique. And I think you go into it thinking like it's going to be just youth group for 3 days, but it's just not that at all. And I think the uniqueness of that environment allows for more openness in a weird way,
Mm.
even though there's a lot less people in the room that you knew before you got there. So it's an interesting environment.
It is for sure. No, I totally know what you're describing. Yeah, because in some ways it seems like okay, yeah, this is just another youth group lesson, but there is something different about it, and yeah, a lot of factors play into that. Something we've asked others who've taught electives on this podcast is what you've learned through this process. As we set out to teach an elective, and even as you said, we get a topic, we might have kind of an idea of the direction in which we're going, but then the Lord kind of shifts maybe that in some other directions we didn't intend, and then He teaches us through the process. Just curious if there's anything that comes to mind of nuances you saw in Habakkuk, nuances you saw in just doubt, any questions from students that had you think about this in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I was not expecting, um, I think for myself and for a lot of kids, both in my youth group and in others, that this was brought up throughout the week, um, was just I think first of all how much I needed to hear that it's okay to doubt, and
Mm,
I'm so amazed at how much I need to hear that. Considering I was teaching a class on it, and you would think after 15 years of youth ministry experience, I would understand that it's okay to doubt. But I think I needed to hear it. But I'm also just alarmed at how many kids that were at this camp hadn't ever heard that before, and
mm,
we're sort of it was sort of a sort of knocked them off their kind of comfortable perch a little bit, and kind of to think like, yeah, that's something that I've struggled with a lot, and I've never really felt like it's okay to say that.
mm.
um, and in a lot of cases, they're kids that grew up in churches and grew up in youth groups. And I don't mean to sound like I'm criticizing those youth leaders or criticizing those churches. I think that it's something um, that's pretty common in churches. First of all, to sort of try to suppress hard questions and doubts, but I also think it's one of those things that, like we were just talking about, I think in the unique environment of an RYM elective, sometimes things that have been said to you for years, you know, you finally hear them, or they sound different, or whatever. So whichever one of those two things is true, I think that there were so many kids that either texted that to me or came up and talked to me about it, or kids in my youth group that brought it up later in the just I'd never really heard that, you can doubt, and doubt is in some ways an expression of faith, because it's, you're challenging, but you're also seeking answers. You're also seeking the Lord in that. And I think um yeah, just it was surprising to hear how many kids were thankful for that, thankful
Mhm,
to hear that, and how that had opened up some conversation. So I would say that that's the main thing that comes to mind, where I was not
mhm.
expecting that. I was not expecting it to um, take that kind of route, and um, it allowed me on the second day to really talk through, what it is to suppress doubt, and why it's so dangerous and harmful. And I was planning on touching on that, but that was really kind of the bulk of the second day.
Mm.
What how we can mishandle doubt, how we can handle it wrongly, um, and yeah, I think that it was unexpected how much that was going to be part of the week. So I'd say that
Yeah,
was
yeah.
probably
Well, you think of the significance of that for those students who were in your elective and never thought about or heard that it's okay to doubt and to, like you said, there's so much where we're owning our faith because we're wrestling with some truth, and that there's so much about Christianity that's crazy if we really think about it. But getting to that point where you're wrestling with it and seeing the truth and clinging to it, yeah, just think of the freedom that gives those students. I know we're going to be wrapping this up in just a little bit. Just curious, kind of where you ended it on the third day, and even kind of as the students are leaving, here's some things to do with your doubt, or some counsel that you gave. Just anything there.
Yeah. So I sort of taught through Habakkuk, kind of chapters 1 and 2 on the first 2 days, and then I spent chapter 3, or day 3, on chapter 3, basically. And I heard Ben Melcher say it earlier on an episode of the podcast, because he was talking
Hmm.
about Habakkuk as well, and just the beauty of the fact that Habakkuk ends in a song, like the fact that the sort of back and forth between Habakkuk and God kind of stops, and Habakkuk just breaks into this song about who God is and what God has done. And so, yeah, so we really kind of picked apart chapter 3 and went through, and yeah, I did the sort of classic pastor thing, gave them five kind of R's we see through Habakkuk chapter 3. But I think the one thing that resonates with me in Habakkuk 3, one of the main things that resonates with me that I really wanted to impress upon them was the emphasis Habakkuk places on what's happened in the past, and the fact that his grounding at the end of the book, it's not I'm sure of everything, I have every answer, but it's that I don't know what God's doing, but I'm going to trust him because he's proven himself faithful in the past. And he kind of gives us this entire rehearsal of everything that's happened in the history of Israel in a one chapter form. And you see the psalmists doing this as well. You see this constantly throughout the Bible. And yeah, so just kind of impressing upon them, how can we remember what God has done in the midst of these really, really traumatic experiences, in the midst of these kind of crises of faith? How can we think back and remember? And then, kind of going into, we do rehearse kind of what God has done. That's what worship is. That's what we do each Sunday, and kind of impressing upon them what it is to be in the local church, what it is to be in corporate worship. And, when we take the Lord's Supper, it's not just this kind of fun activity meal. We are rehearsing not only what's been done, not only to remind us of what's been done, but we're rehearsing for what's going to happen, when Christ makes all things new. And that's what worship is in a nutshell. And so I think to kind of not only kind of practically, give them categories for how do we remember things, remember God's faithfulness in the midst of doubt, but also how does that get done in the context of the Christian community. I think that it's been very helpful for me, and I think it resonated a lot with them as well.
Yeah,
so I'd say that was one of the main things for sure.
Yeah, no, that's a great word for sure. Taylor, look, thanks so much for just serving RYM this summer by teaching this elective, but then also taking the time to come on here today. I know that the semester's kicking up for most of those in youth ministry, and so you've got a lot on your plate. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on today.
It's my pleasure, John. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, come and buy without money. Oh, come and feast without pay. For the King has opened his banquet hall to the beggar, the outcast, and the slave. For the King has opened his banquet hall to the beggar, the outcast,